Does the bicycle in GTA SA have gears? Or can you skydive on it? Those and other questions are going to be answered in today's video. We start off with the mentioned fun fact, which in my opinion is a banger. That function blew my mind, to be fair. I discovered it some time ago while casually playing the Chiliad challenge. Riding up Mount Chiliad on a mountain bike, I noticed that CJ has zero issue with riding up steep surfaces even without me tapping the W key. I took a closer look and it turns out that the mountain bike has a simplified gear system. Check this clip out. Notice how at some point CJ suddenly begins to pedal very fast. That results in him being able to ride up even very steep hills. So exactly as if he switched gears to a lower one, just like you would in real life. So sure, there's only 2 gears, but that's a crazy detail for an old-ass GTA. What makes this fun fact even better is that the function is only present in the mountain bike. The BMX or the regular bicycle lack it. A good comedy is the mission Custom Fast Track, or rather, what happens after failing it. See, the mission has a very interesting trait to it, and this time I don't mean the crane mechanic. See, if we fail the mission at the point where we're offloading the containers onto land by dropping the container from a too big height, something interesting happens. The developers wanted to make the failure scene more realistic. Instead of despawning Caesar, they decided to put him in his savanna and make him drive away from the spot. Seems like a cool treat, but it simultaneously creates potential for absurd images. See, it turns out that this mission doesn't force you to drive to the docks in Caesar's savanna at all. In fact, you can even destroy it and no consequences will follow. So essentially, whatever vehicle we drive to the docks, in that vehicle, Caesar will drive away after failing the quest. And that sometimes leads to intriguing images. Let's start with land vehicles. Of course, everyone who calls himself a GTA player has one thing on their mind now: the Rhino tank. And they won't be disappointed, as Caesar wheels the tank like a dream, and additionally, he performs some satanic drift while he's at it. Additionally, he has the ability to perform very sharp turns as if he were in a cart. It also turns out that Caesar apparently got very pissed at us failing the job. He drives like a complete psychopath, and each time he hits someone, he gets out of the tank, takes out a basey, and tries to beat up that someone. After which, he goes back to the tank and the action goes on. He even forgot about his friendship with CJ, cause if we'll be the ones he hits, he'll want to give us a beating as well. The only way to calm that lunatic down is to aim a gat at his head. Then I tried putting him in a boat and pushing him into the water. Yet again, I was not disappointed. Caesar went batso and began to smash his boat at a wall, doing some crazy acrobatics at that as if he were a highly rated stuntman. Boat flips in the air? Only Caesar can pull tricks like that. In turn, Caesar doesn't seem to know how to drive a vortex. At first, everything seems normal. Caesar accelerates forwards. Then he hits the wreck of the car we dropped, after which he begins to reverse. He begins and never ends. Caesar will reverse infinitely. And in the end, it's worth mentioning that Caesar is a trained pilot. See, he proves that to us if we give him a Hydra. I mean, first we do actually have to set the thrusters to a diagonal position. Otherwise, he doesn't fly so well. Yet with the diagonal position of the thrusters, Caesar will fly away in a very professional fashion. Once, he even showed off a little. Take a look at that. Let's go back to Mount Chiliad and a cool thing related to its challenge. See, the Chiliad challenge is a race from the top of a mountain all the way to its foot. The developers implemented something which I call the anti-detour system in the race. It means that if a player goes too far off the racetrack, the screen fades out and the game teleports them back to the last checkpoint that they've reached on the track. And it turns out that that mechanism can be utilized in a very interesting way. We've got another thing with mixing procedures. We had sliding, we had the first-person camera, and infinite animations. Now it's time for mixing parachuting with bike riding. First, we ride our bicycle off of a cliff while having a parachute in our inventory. Then, while falling, we have to get off our bicycle literally frames before the screen fades out and then immediately open the parachute. In my case, the game waits around 4 seconds from the jump to the fade out. However, exact calculations may vary depending on the version, frame rate, or visual settings. It's best if everyone has a few tries first and counts how much time they have and only then attempts to perform the trick. In any case, if we pull this off, after we spawn back at the beginning of the track, CJ will have his parachute open despite still being on a bicycle. Additionally, the parachute will still react to the directional keys. However, the sole physics of parachuting doesn't work, so it doesn't break our fall. Although, the physics is not fully inactive, but we'll get to that in a second. First, I want to tell you why I think this happens. See, the whole trick is that the game puts us on a bicycle while performing the function of opening the parachute. In normal free roam, something like that is absolutely unachievable. Cause how are we supposed to get into a vehicle while opening a parachute? In this case, the script handles that. That's why it works. That's why the parachute script doesn't even consider that a player may be in a vehicle. I mean, it does forbid a player to open it if they're in a vehicle, but once a player begins opening it, the script ceases to check anything. That's why some things, like animations or visual controls of the parachute, still work, while other things, like physics or actual controls, get overwritten by the bike riding function. However, the effect does have its unique properties. First of all, CJ will not fall off his bicycle in this state. We can bump into objects, land head down, whatever. CJ will still remain on the bicycle. Secondly, this trick allows us to one-shot pedestrians by riding them over without falling off the bike and without any slowdowns. So that allows for wreaking a little havoc on the streets.
Quadra kill.
In addition to that, the police are not as dangerous, as the game gives us sort of arrest immunity. See, if we have a wanted star and a policeman bucks us off our bicycle, CJ will perform the animation of taking off the parachute, which prevents the arrest. So essentially, we've got a second chance in this aspect. And undoubtedly, the best effect is the leftover of the parachute physics. See, it seems as if certain properties do not get overwritten by the bike riding model. While performing a wheelie on a regular bike, we need to constantly adjust it to keep the front wheel up. In turn, here, we can completely release the arrow key and our parachute generates sufficient air resistance to keep our wheelie intact. We can even do sharp turns, and often our wheelie survives. And at the end, it's also worth adding that after suffocating underwater, we can see that the game still reads CJ as if he were actually using the parachute. The popular glitch that CJ won't die even on 0 HP while parachuting still applies here. Some time ago, I showed you various unobvious objects one can lift with a forklift in GTA San Andreas. Today, I'd like to add to that list. I'm talking about those blue gas bottles we can find on the camping site next to the Flint intersection. Those bottles are a pretty cool thing because they explode on impact. So if we shoot at them or drive a car into them, they'll explode. They also explode on impact with pedestrians. Additionally, the traffic AI is completely unprepared for that, and that's where we come in. If we place this bottle on the street, the upcoming traffic will drive right into it, blowing their car up. So you might say that this sort of allows for planting landmines. And of course, it's not like that wasn't already possible. We've got satchel charges after all, which give the same effect a lot more conveniently, especially that those gas bottles despawn after we drive them away from their spawn location, which highly limits their use. Yet the sole discovery that those bottles can be utilized this way was pretty satisfying to me. Similarly work the explosive barrels from the mission Deconstruction. There it's a bit better because those barrels never despawn, so we can move them around the entire map. The problem is that those are available only during this particular quest, which is another huge limitation. Another fun fact seems completely crazy at first, but its explanation is laughably simple. See, in this location in Flint County, we've got a certain building by the freeway. Nothing special about it at first glance. However, once we trigger windy weather like a thunderstorm, things start to get juicy. If one takes a close look, it turns out that the building actually sways in a very unnatural way. At first, it can scare you a bit. Is it ghosts or something? Has some demon possessed this place? A perfect opportunity for some paranormal investigations. But the answer is far simpler than that. If we examine the trees or bushes, we'll see that they're swaying in a very similar manner during wind. That's supposed to imitate the effect we see in real life. The wind is often so strong that it can make the trees sway. The developers wanted to mimic that in GTA SA. But of course, not every element of the game's world is delicate enough to be affected by the wind. In the case of buildings, it would look rather absurd. Sure, if we had a small wooden hut, a very strong wind could also cause this effect. And that raises the question, did the developers simply misclick or accidentally flag this building as vegetation and therefore it reacts to wind the same as trees? Or did the developers think that this building is a weak enough structure to be affected by the wind? On the other hand, the game has plenty of other far more delicate structures, even some small wooden sheds in the middle of the forest, in which case this wind effect is not to be observed. Everything points at a simple misclick, whose result seems pretty paranormal at first glance. Before we move on to the next fun fact, give me a sec, I gotta make me some tea. That's the good stuff. Alright, where were we? Right, fun fact. So in GTA San Andreas, after the mission Up Up and Away, a Leviathan begins to always spawn at CJ's airport in the desert. However, after getting a gold medal at all the flight school courses, the game initiates a hunter spawner right next to the Leviathan. The interesting bit is that those two vehicles will never spawn together. We either get a hunter or a Leviathan, never both at the same time. And it's not like they spawn in the same place and the game randomizes which one to spawn each time. Their spawn locations are a safe distance away from each other. Thus, this whole phenomenon seems to be a glitch. The plot twist is that if we drive up to the airport from the west, we'll always get a hunter. In turn, if we drive up from the east, guaranteed Leviathan. So, is that supposed to be an untold mechanic of the developers? No. I still think it's just a glitch. See, let's notice that the hunter spawns west of the Leviathan, and well, the Leviathan obviously east of the hunter. Now, let me also explain what something called a car generator is. It's a function in the game responsible for spawning certain vehicles in certain places. The best example? Sweet's car at Grove Street. Each time a player enters the neighborhood, the game is supposed to spawn CJ's brother's ride of a particular model, a particular color, and a particular license plate. The same function is used at the Verdant Meadows Airport to spawn the hunter and the Leviathan. Where I'm going with this is that the car generator function runs certain checks before spawning a vehicle. First of all, it checks if the player is close to the given location. The second check, the one that's crucial in this case, is if the area in which the vehicle is to spawn is clear. It checks if there's a pedestrian walking there or if the player brought any objects there, or if there's a vehicle there already. You know, we don't want to see Sweet's car spawning on top of the one we parked there a minute ago. Of course, this check is a little exaggerated for safety, so it takes up much more space than the sole volume of the vehicle intended to be spawned. And that's where the key to the riddle lies. If we approach from the west, the game spawns, in order, a Hydra, a Rustler, a Stunt Plane, and a Hunter. But it doesn't spawn a Leviathan. Why? See, apparently, the Leviathans and Hunter's spawn locations are just a little too close to each other. Therefore, the game always spawns the vehicle whose generator function is triggered first. In turn, the one that comes second won't spawn the vehicle because the area won't be clear anymore because of the first one already being spawned. The same applies for the reverse situation. We drive up from the side closer to the Leviathan. The game spawns a Leviathan first, when a Hunter has not been spawned yet. And then seconds later, the game rejects the Hunter generator function because the already spawned Leviathan makes the game think that there's no room for a Hunter. The only flaw of this theory is that the Stunt Plane is actually closer to the Hunter than the Leviathan. So in theory, if to assume that theory is correct, driving up from the west should not allow for a Hunter spawn either, because its generator function should be rejected by the already spawned Stunt Plane. However, I think that the game doesn't include Stunt Plane's wings for this check, so only the main corpus of the vehicle is detected. In that case, the Stunt Plane is a bit further from the Hunter than the Leviathan, so everything makes sense again. But I'm not fully certain about this, so if you have better ideas, then let me know about them in the comments. That's all for today. If you have something to add pertaining to any of the fun facts, or you have a suggestion for me to check something extra, write a comment and describe your thoughts. Meanwhile, take care and see you soon.